Hey Taylor, welcome to Automate All the Things. We're so excited to have you.
Aaron, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm really excited that you're here. I've been, such a Zapier fanboy for so long, and I feel like I talk about Zapier every single stream. So I'm so excited that you're here, and particularly you're here to kind of talk about something new that you've launched. But before we kind of get into it, how about a quick introduction into yourself, Taylor, and what you do at Zapier?
Sure, that'd be great. So my name is Taylor Halliday. I run a new product at Zapier called Transfer. We've been working on a transfer, maybe kind of in and out for about the past year or so. More recently, we really started to make a big push towards bringing it to market and kind of productionalizing it in a meaningful way, and that's kind of what we'll jump into. And the kind of life before that was really spending a lot more time, I'd say, closer to our R&D functions, really kind of testing the waters with transfer things like it, kind of couple capabilities, and really kind of pressing the envelope on Zapier's existing offering and trying to figure out where we can add additional value.
Yeah. So I think hey Colleen, hey Joel, just saying hi to folks. If you're in the chat, let us know, give us a little hello. Um, I'm obviously have spent a lot of time in Zapier, and I remember, Zapier when I first touched it, it kind of like blew my mind, right? I was like, instantly, this is gonna change people's lives, and I think Zapier has brought in a whole new not ecosystem is not the right word. Like you created this whole new thing that now everyone replicates, right? And that there's a huge competition around it. So maybe for folks who aren't as intimately knowledgeable or used to the tool as we are, can you give a quick intro into what Zapier is? And then second, like where does transfer kind of fit in to Zapier's general goal?
Totally. So taking a step back, Zapier is, you mentioned, a very widespread automation tool. And so, kind of, what does that mean? Typically, the world in which we operate is that there are events, we call them triggers, and those events kick off a downstream series of actions. That is kind of vanilla use case, if you will. And so, like materially, what does that mean? It could be as simple as I have a new contact that appears in Salesforce, and I really would like to get over to Mailchimp. Zapier is perfect at doing those type of things. You can blow that complexity way out and make a much more large, business use case out of it, such as add them to Mailchimp, kick off or add them also to a CRM and have a whole bunch of bells and whistles go off. And really, that's where another huge piece or kind of asset of Zapier comes into play, which is our breadth of integrations. Where I think we're at 4,000 plus at this point. Um, but yeah, so there's a large kind of surface area of things that you can automate with Zapier, and ever growing as well. And then second part of the question, kind of where's transfer fit in this whole mix?
Mm-hmm.
So Zapier, 9, 10 years now in operation. Again, the paradigm has very much been it's okay, like an ad hoc automation style platform. Uh, but since day one, there has been, constant inbound about, hey, look, Zapier is great. I have, go back to my example. I have a new contact that appeared inside of Salesforce. I want to get them over to Mailchimp, but hey, I already have 100, contacts in Salesforce. What do I do with those? How do I get them over?
Right.
And to be frank, this entire time, the kind of the attitude's been like, makes sense, use cases there. But that said, like we're really focused on the automation aspect of this workflow. And so we hear you. Here are some workarounds. You could go back there and try to export a CSV, and see if they have an import CSV is another thing. There's a few different ideas, but really we're kind of the view up until recently is like this is a tangential problem and probably outside of our purview effectively. We're happy to help to some degree, but there are other workarounds. And so more recently we've been kind of stressing or pressing like that assumption, trying to figure out is there something actually there for us, in a more workflow sense. And so that is really kind of what born the original like genesis of the idea of transfer is kind of like if we were to add not just ad hoc at the moment automation capabilities to Zapier, but also start to look at like what does Zapier look and feel like with the ability to like look back at your existing data, your historical
Mm-hmm.
data. Does that open up kind of new possibilities with how you create workflows? And so again, that was kind of how the genesis of transfer kind of started. And then as we'll hop into it, this is kind of first manifestation, if you will, of that exploration.
Yeah, no. So I remember, seeing transfer and having like an expectation of like, obviously, it's like such a natural next step, right? Because, when we think of automation, you've got like, if this happens, then do this, right? So those kind of trigger and then actions that you've been so focused in. But I think what, over the last 10 years, there's been so many flavors of that, right? There's been, those kind of scenario type situations, or, hey, we're going to like really verticalize, our we're going to go so deep into this API, but we're only going to have 5 connections that some of your competitors do. And we talked about this like ETL type transactions, right? So just, if this then that is huge. And I mean, in the workflow fund, not the company. Zapier kind of dominates that space. So transfers just seems like a natural next step. Now, I'd love to hear from you, like, there's so much you can do around sending information from one place to the other. And we're going to jump into actually demoing that in a moment, but place transfer where it is today into that ecosystem. So what it's good for, what it isn't good for, what you hope maybe that it's good for. So talk to us a little bit about where it sits today.
Yeah, for sure. So again, we will hop into it and kind of get some more substance, kind of what we're talking about, and
Yeah.
from a high level right now. But transfer as it is today, we have again, like we try to answer the need of moving existing historical records, with through an automation. And so what that means that you can go ahead and select an application, look at the records inside of there that you'd like to actually move manually over, and transfer is phenomenal at doing that. That checks a lot of boxes for a lot of use cases in terms of the example, one I just gave, others as well, such as like migrations and some few more that we'll get into. And so we kind of decided to stop there, put that one out there, try to check the box on those
Mm.
user needs, and kind of see what came of it. And as you can probably imagine, and again, if you're a longtime Zapier user, it's probably no surprise to you that Zapier can be taken and turned and twisted in a lot of different ways. Our users are incredibly they excel at bending Zapier in ways that we never thought possible. And so one of the fun things about that is you get a lot of interesting use cases coming back and feedback coming back. We also mentioned as well, we have a very vocal user base who's very enthused about the product, which makes for no shortage of fun when you're working the product development side about kind of ideas and signals about where to take it to. And so again, I want to stick with this theme of ad hoc. And so right now, transfer is very much an ad hoc tool, like I said before.
Hmm.
And that's what we intentionally started, is that to see where we kind of go with it. There has been constant, like push or pull, if you want to say, that around like, hey, look, Zapier in itself is not necessarily ad hoc; it's an automated tool. What does an automated kind of transfer look like? And so there's a couple different like offshoots of it that are potentially interesting. You have, as you just said, the ETL use case. It's a very popular class of tools. Distinction though, ETL is very much a class of tools that you would say like live in enterprise land.
Hmm.
A big distinction about ETL. Typically, if the user base isn't super familiar with it, it's a large scale data kind of movement tool. It's the marquee kind of things with ETLs that typically they're connected to very large data lakes, data stores, whatnot. And Zapier, again, we can do that type of stuff. It's just not off. It's just a little bit off the beaten path for the typical SMB.
Right.
We have perspective that we have. And so, anyways, I'm never going to say like that's an interesting thing to us for sure. Like, how do you kind of automate this thing potentially in like, not a full ETL, but what kind of makes it kind of look more like that? That's one option. Another option too is or a piece of feedback we've heard quite a bit is around kind of updating records
Hmm.
with transfer, having being a little smarter about moving things back and forth. And if you pair that with automation, you start butting up against this notion of kind of sync as well. And so
Right.
that has been something we've heard decent amount of feedback around. I think that's interesting as well. Kind of a third piece that it's also being pressed on is that transfer right now sits in itself and took its kind of separate experience, separate tool by design,
Right.
and makes sense. But we have a lot of folks asking for different ways to kind of integrate that with an existing Zap. How do I kind of use transfer in tandem better with some of the existing workflows? And so those are things also we're thinking about quite a bit.
So I want to come back to what you said at the beginning, where you said people are very innovative and twist Zapier into ways you don't expect. And just on behalf of everyone who watches and enjoys Automate All the Things, we'd like to apologize for that because we are those people. right? Where you give us one thing and we twist it and turn it into something else. And I'm hoping that we're going to do the same thing with transfer and kind of come back to you with like, yes, there's sync and there's so much we'd love to do with this, but just how do we take what already exists, right? Which is transfer, one ad hoc way of moving data from one to the other, and then actually use that to kind of patch holes in our workflow, right? So, I'm personally excited that there are more and more tools kind of thinking about like, yes, we did the, if something happens here, let's send it over there, but that's just one larger piece of the challenges of working in multiple systems, which is everyone's reality, to be honest, especially mine. There's a question in the chat, and I'll let you answer this one. What does ETL stand for? And I think more generally, what is ETL? So what would be that other layer that you kind of call ETL?
Sure. So ETL, it's an acronym, stands for extract, transfer, load. And I love the question, like, what is an ETL? Because from doing a decent amount of research and kind of talking with folks and doing user interviews, I told you about inbounds and questions about like this, looking like an ETL and whatnot. I can definitively tell you that no one has a consistent definition of ETL. Just from my experience from and asking around quite a bit. And so ETL, describe it as again, like I said before, it's much more of like an enterprise type of class of a tool. It's typically, if I were to give a definition to it, it's typically involved with moving data in and out of, I'd say, like data lakes or a large kind of analytical databases. So you think of like Redshift, BigQuery, whatnot. If you're a large enterprise, you would get an ETL typically for, let me get the use case here, to seed or like move data from like some of your business databases, Postgres, MySQL, over to, let's say, like your Redshift instance on a nightly
Hmm.
basis. Like could be a ETL type use case. Obviously, that use case does not really fall super within the crosshairs of your, like, let's say, more micro SMB. Probably not a ton of data lakes running around, but nonetheless, like you can start to see where some of those where there's like some crossover there in terms of capabilities. We talked about kind of look back, bulk records, whatnot, and so I can kind of see where people find kind of crossover and interest there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for folks, we're going to jump in here in a moment. But if they had to place, Zapier transfers, folks of Automate All Things and no coders in general kind of have this like never-ending list of tools that they want to try. Zapier transfers today is like I have data in tool A, I want to move it to tool B in a one-way fashion, right? So one way and like ad hoc, right? So this is particularly useful and kind of as I'm looking at this and as we talked about it was like I'm starting a new tool, right? I'm using a new tool. I have data here and I like to move it over there in an efficient manner. Or maybe I have a recurring new pieces of information, right? And so the use case we're going to jump into is like marketing. And I don't know why marketing always gets blamed for this. Like marketing sends me a report every Monday morning in CSV and I need to move it to this other tool, right, in an efficient manner, right? And that's really annoying to have to copy paste, worry about formatting, things like that. And so transfer by Zapier, which is not Zapier, transfer by Zapier, is that like that's where it fits. I have tool information here. I want to move it there. I want to click a button and it does that for me on an ad hoc basis. Does that feel right for you as a way of like explaining where it is today before we jump into an actual demo? And folks, if you have any questions, shoot, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's great.
Perfect.
And those are, we'll go through those use cases. Yep.
Amazing. Cool. Okay. Well, let's jump in, folks. And Taylor's here. If you have any questions, feel free to poke and prod. And we're gonna jump into our use case for today. One that I dreamed up, but actually feels quite close to reality. So the way I've thought of framing this was like, okay, so imagine I get leads what is that movie like the Always Be Closing where they get like a stack of leads every Monday. So we're gonna replicate that, but in the modern 2021 kind of environment where every Monday you get your 20 leads, right? But you get these in a Google Sheet, right? And you are a modern, knowledge worker, and so you need this information in Airtable, obviously. And so we're going to transfer this on an ad hoc basis from Google Sheets into Airtable using transfer by Zapier. So folks, again, if you have a use case that you're wondering about, like, oh, does this fit? Let us know in the chat. Taylor's more than happy to answer that. And if you have kind of things you wish or would like to do and wondering if you can do them, drop them in the chat. And we're going to have a bunch of time today to answer those questions. So cool. So Taylor, this is our starting point. This is going to be our endpoint, right? So structured information here. I've got the name, the account, the email, phone. Some of this information, lives here. Some of it doesn't. So let's talk to me about how we go about taking this and migrating it over to Airtable or to whatever system on an ad hoc basis using Transfer by Zapier.
Sure, absolutely. So first step, go to zapier.com, left-hand side. I see a button that says transfers over there to get to the tool. Perfecto. If you don't have one, you'll see the screen, but feel free to jump in and let's make one.
So first question, I guess, is does this kind of already work with most apps that Zapier integrates with?
That's a great question. And maybe I should worth quickly kind of touching this a little more deeply. So the answer
absolutely.
straight up is no.
Okay.
It does not work with I'd say even the majority of our apps. And so it's another thing that it's interesting about transfer with regard to Zapier more globally is that I would say over the past, however long, 8-9 years, we've really kind of early on created a good spec for what our integrations look, do, and feel like. Stuck with that story for quite a long time. And when I say that, if you were to go to Zapier and build an integration for your application, or what partner would or whatnot, there's a certain set of APIs and whatnot and bindings that you can use to hook in your app into Zapier, and that's how we have our app platform, frankly. With those set of capabilities, we would not be able to make transfer. So in order to make transfer, what we had to do here is actually expand out this capability of our existing, we call it app platform, if you will, to allow us to go ahead and do things like historical lookbacks and paging and whatnot. And so this has been definitely a shift, and probably actually the first major shift in the app platform that we've had in maybe since its inception. And so it's all within the need also of creating new experiences on Zapier and trying to figure out, are there kind of, again, more different use cases that we could actually go ahead and serve. And so again, circling back to your original question, no, the actual apps and actions are ones that we, most part, handpicked. There's some partners we worked with, not really, a demo basis to have them incorporate these bulk capabilities, if you will, into their app. And so what you see here is really just an actual expansion of our existing app platform.
Yeah, so it kind of has probably those core ones that you'd imagine out of the gate, right, as being important. And what I'm hearing from you is that you've actually changed your app platform in order to allow others eventually to scale and have that same breadth, eventually on transfer. Is that kind of the vision as well?
Totally, it's definitely the vision. It's a transfer, again, as we talked about, is a version of what we think of Zapier as having both capabilities look like. But there might be other offshoots as well in the future. And so, and the only other thing I'd say too is that actually even today, it's our developers able to modify their apps to accommodate transfer capabilities.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So if folks are watching and you have an app, you can modify it and get it into transfer, which is awesome. Cool. So I'm picking Google Sheets, which is our kind of starting point. And then we're going to go to this table. And then I want to create record, right? So I want net new records from here to here. So Airtable part, very simple based, is actually our template sales CRM. Contacts are what I'm importing. I'm curious to see how this account linked record is gonna, because I know that these are not existing. So we'll see how Zapier Transfer takes those and whether it creates a new linked record, which I expect it to do. But again, we're projecting ourselves into the future here. So we're gonna take every spreadsheet row and create a net new record. And this is the example of ad hoc, one time, boom. Yeah, Google Sheets, boom. So not only does it seems to connect to existing apps, but it also takes those existing connections to those apps, right? So if I've already configured my connections in Zapier to spreadsheets or Google Sheets or Airtable, it reuses those existing connections.
That's a good call out. And so it not only does that, but if you're again familiar with Zapier, what you're looking at right now is part where you would actually load up, for example, like information from those accounts. And so these are all very similar things you'd find in Zapier.com.
Yeah, so I think I need to reconnect my
Chrome's
Google
good.
Sheet. No, it's okay. Let me just reconnect it.
Okay.
Let me go. This is on me. This is on me. Let me go. Let me connect. Let me just reconnect my account. There we go. You want to allow that? I trust you guys. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Well placed.
Let's see if this works. There we go. So new leads.
There we go.
There we go. And then the worksheet is probably sheet 1 because mock data. Perfect. Okay.
Like a great
So
candidate to move data from.
This actually feels very much like you've given it a little refresh here, because I know that you guys are now kind of you're reusing all those elements that I'm familiar with Zapier, but this is actually like a nice fresh look.
Thank you. Yeah. No. Again, so I was trying to press on that a little bit earlier. Is that this has a new capability transfer tab that Zapier didn't have before. We definitely have built this. I use the term app platform before. This is on top of other primitives or fundamentals you would find inside the app platform. So with that, you'd find very common things like you're going through right now, which is select an account, select what information inside that account you care about, namely which base in your Airtable or which sheet in your Google Sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes why rebuild the whole thing, right? So Airtable, let me see which base I'm in. I'm in Sales CRM. I believe Sales CRM, boom, table, contacts. Now my expectation is that, okay, there we go. So you're saying here, this actually is that step 1. So this actually feels very much like a Zap, right? Where when I actually select that table, what pulls up is each field, and it's asking me like, okay, when I transfer that information, what is our mapping from our columns in the sheets to our Airtable base? And then my expectation is that you do this for every single tool. You take data from one and you move data to the other. Now, before I do this, I'm going to get a question in the chat, which I'm like 99% sure, if it's not already there, is can I edit the data between those two steps? Right? So let's imagine I want to, get the first name or use something like Zapier Formatter, or, is it possible to kind of add a step between the two? And if no, that's fine. I just know that I'm going to get that question for sure.
Totally. So the answer is no. No, right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though. It does kind of go back to one of the questions you had earlier, and that's kind of why I was trying to make the mental kind of bridge effectively is when I was using this lofty term ETL, extract, transform, load. That's kind of fits in that that realm actually. Extract, pull from Google Sheets, and what you just asked about transform, do something with it in the intermediary, and then load is effectively a fancy or kind of funny way of saying just send it over there. So yeah, that does again kind of fit very well with feedback we've heard, such as like I want to do some intermediary transformations, or filtering and whatnot. Like those are use cases we've definitely heard.
Yeah. So I not to brag, but I know the audience quite well, and Amir already asked the question. Can I edit the data between the two steps? I do promise I did not see that in the chat when I asked you the question. I just, I have this tingle in my brain that says, someone's going to ask this question for sure. And Amir, appreciate you pulling through for us and asking that question. And so, yeah, so I do kind of think I like the fact that you're very clear on like, this is not an ETL tool today. And I think this is a good example, like between Google Sheets and Airtable, like you can do a lot of not ETL type information, but if you just want the first name, create a first name column here and then migrate that. So your kind of expectation today, it's like we're only migrating the cleaned up data or the transformed data, today in transfer, and then we're just going to send it once. So here, now it's more of a mapping exercise of like, okay, name an organization. That's a formula field, so we're not going to fill it in because it's a concatenation of others. Name is going to go ahead and pull from name. Can't believe I did a good job of actually mapping my field names here. There we go. Next is email. Hopefully it's called, yep, there we go. And it's cool. You actually pull in a test one. And I remember doing that. So appreciate you automatically pulling in a test row. As someone who's used to working with tools that force you to test, this is a nice little touch. Phone.
Thank you much. But all credit to the transfer team on little niceties there. So
this is what I'm curious about. So let's see what this does, right? So I'm currently inputting some text, right, from here, which is the account, and now this is an array in Airtable. So I'm curious, and we could do another test after if it'll do multi-reference fields or actually actual arrays, which I know a lot of folks are going to ask me about from transferring from Excel or Airtable to Webflow, which I know is a very common task. So LinkedIn is just a URL. Interactions is empty. Opportunities is a linked record. And then name. Interesting, because name is at the end, and I thought I filled it in at the beginning. Account. Oh, whoops. So account. Okay, so here, one second. I messed it all up. I went too quickly. So account maps to the word account, which makes sense. Name organization is a formula field. Department, I don't have, right? So because that's a single select, so we can test that after. I'm curious to see what will happen for a single select. Let's actually go ahead and copy paste it. I'm curious to see what a single select will look like. And I imagine, do I need to refresh to get this new, so let's call this department. And let's call this HR. And I'm curious to see if you'll create a new, I'm like testing your tool out live on a stream.
Yeah. This is fantastic.
So I'm curious to see if it'll create a new single select here. And then let's go ahead, save this. And if I reset up Google Sheets, it's gonna get the mapping again.
You went further back than I would have even gone. Yeah, I was actually gonna say on the drop down, it's a little hard to see on the picture in picture for the podcast, but they're on the mapping steps where you were at originally. I believe we have a load more button which would refresh that example or that sample, if you will. I might be wrong on that, but I just got a little tough to kind of
here. Connect to Google Sheets.
Drop down any one of your mapping selections right now.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of curious. Is there at the very bottom of that? Is there load more or refresh?
Let me try to get one. Where I'm at the top of my screen. Doesn't seem like there's a. Is this it?
Okay, maybe not. Never mind. Okay, sorry.
No worries. Product feedback right there.
Some stuff might be in the works. Some stuff might not be out there.
So you heard it here first. There's going to be a refresh button eventually, right? Someone's working on it for sure. No worries. That was actually quick. So here we have department now. Great. The department, interaction, link record, opportunities, name should be name. Okay, there we go. That feels about right. Okay, name and organization, title, opportunities, those VIP is a true false. Okay, next. Okay, good. So this is a good, I was just going to ask you, is there a preview? Okay, so this is saying, I was giving me an example. Perfect. This is actually a nice touch as well.
Thank you. Again, like all credit to the amazing team we have working on this. This was a fun opportunity in several different ways. One of them is kind of like, hey, how can we test some assumptions and maybe kind of put in some fun new things that existing or Zapier doesn't have. And so this is one of the things we thought may be kind of cool. This would be more similar to, again, if you're familiar with Zapier, we have this kind of notion of like samples, like when you're building a Zap, you can kind of click in and say test, whatnot. This is a much more, I'd say, blown out, kind of refined look of that experience, if you will.
Yeah, I really like this idea of like, okay, I might not be clear on what every single, especially when I'm working for the sheet, right? Sometimes like folks are not like thinking of databases, and they'll just be like, yeah, let me put a phone number here, or some random number here, and that actually might make your transfer fail when it comes to Airtable, right? Because if you're trying to input a URL into a single select field or things like that, or a bunch of numbers into like formula fields, right? You're not going to be able to transfer that. But this feels good. I'm like 60% confident this will work. Not because of you, because of me. So let's go ahead and looks good. And this is going to go ahead and transfer it over.
Not quite. We'll hit the button and we'll see what happens.
Oh, okay. So I can filter on the back end.
Yes. Again, so ad hoc, but you can go ahead and filter, which ones you want to actually go ahead and transfer over at this stage of the game.
And also by like so let's say I want email. Oh, and then I could search by that, but I can't say like only, I can't filter here and say like only send those that, maybe if I have a deal size that are over 1,000. This is just saying out of these ones, which ones do you want to, I want all, essentially.
Yes, but these are all again like pieces of feedback we've received. There is, as you can tell, a light filtering step up here. Whether or not that filter is doing exact, partial, fuzzy match like it's doing right now, or if, like you mentioned, we had like a greater than 500 million for a deal size, for instance, right? We don't have that yet, but it's as you can imagine, it definitely fits within the realm of stuff we've heard as feedback as well. And so, but yeah, so right now what you have, I could say, is very like simple filtering, if you will. But yeah,
you're planting the seeds, Taylor. I have to say, a lot of people can see where this is going and are extremely excited about it. And just where it is today, I'm extremely excited about it. So let's sync this. This looks good. I've selected all of them. It's saying boom, boom, boom. Oh, it's gonna take 1 minute. Interesting. I love how the fact that
you're more of a confirmation. We ran into situations in the earlier versions where folks just didn't grasp how many records they were about to send, and so this is just more of like a hey, heads up, you had 29, other people might have 10,000. I might just want to double check that one that they really meant to send 10,000. So that was kind of more of a confirmation for that.
And so they're here. They have arrived. Great work.
Cool.
I think we have them right here. So let's see the first one. Let's try to find the first one, and then beta is the first. Let me go here. Boom. And I think congratulations. I think we can do some confetti. That was some great work. We just transferred 20 records really easily.
Better the demo failed, right? So we're already ahead of the game.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, do I not have my confetti? Okay, there we go. All right, easy transfers. So there's some questions in the chat that I want to get to, but just before we get into it, it seemed like in the back end, you're kind of using that struct. That you're creating these records one at a time. So what I see is you're kind of using that existing API structure to say like, okay, we're going to fit this into the existing integration that you already have with us of just like, we're going to ping your API 20 times essentially on a scheduled way, right?
As it is now, you are correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Love to see that. Cool. So one other thing that I think is really, really cool that I do want to bring everyone's attention to is that it properly mapped that single line text into an array for Airtable and sent it as a linked record, right? So this allows us, if someone kind of creates our accounts in Google Sheets, one of the challenges is like you're going to have an accounts table and it's going to be a mess in Google Sheets, but you've properly, or maybe our API does that, or Airtable's API does that, maps that into a new record. So if I go into accounts, I should have somewhere, you can see these new records, right? Because you have to associate it to something. It couldn't find an existing department or the existing account, so it created a new one. But that also means that if you create a new account or an existing account, it'll find it. It'll match it to your existing structure, which I think just speaks to like the intelligence of the tools that we're using, that it'll do that and instantly kind of do that transfer.
So I would
Yeah,
say
go
with
ahead.
transfer, it's been fun testing. I was going to say, yeah, the different data types. Being interesting testing with transfer is you can imagine the complexity blows out quite a bit there, and so
Yeah.
but yeah, to your point, whether or not that particular part was handled by some gracefulness on our side in transfer, or if the gracefulness was picked up in the integration in it itself, or maybe an Airtable, TBD. But there's a lot of fancy stuff going on.
Yeah, and as a no coder or someone who's not actually in the weeds of it, I'm just happy that it's graceful and I appreciate that. So thanks, thanks for making it easy for us. And I think a second point here is actually you also map new single select fields, right? So this is an example where if someone in the sheet uses HR instead of human resources, sometimes that would actually make Airtable or some tools fail, right? Because it doesn't recognize that existing single select. In this case, it'll create it. And what that does is that you might want to sanitize it here, right? Such that you're not creating new single select fields for errors and how people are writing. But they're relatively easy to catch here as well, because you can just be like, oh, that feels weird. Let me just actually remap this to human resources and then delete that right there. Last question. I'm curious who. Okay, interesting. So, last note here, and this is just because I'm an Airtable geek, is that it says that I created via API because it is your Zapier is connected via my API account, and therefore, from Airtable's perspective, I'm the one creating these via Zapier API, which totally makes sense. Which would be the case if I created these via an API myself. Cool. So I think one more thing I wanted to show off is, okay, well, our use case here was I get these every week, right? So I'm imagining that if I get this the new week, like the next following week, new leads number 2. And let's give ourselves like 10. Give it a second here to load. And let's just give ourselves 5 leads this week. I didn't close any deals last week because I have a YouTube channel. I don't
Podcasting too much.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not on the phones, man. I'm not calling enough people. My deals are too small. They're not giving me leads, man. They're not giving me leads. So
Yeah.
how would I go about being like, okay, pulling in the new leads just to reuse all the work that we just did? We spent like 15 minutes setting up that transfer. How do I reapply that existing transfer into like a new one? How do I like be like, okay, I want to do this again, but with this new sheet that I have?
Yeah, totally. So there's kind of two options. If you go back to where you left off, perfect. So I think it says in the right there. Okay, perfect. You should have a transfer there. Okay, so hard stop real quick here. So
Yeah.
we've carried over the notion of like persistence of like a transfer, just as you find like persistence of a zap effectively, right?
Right.
And so if you were to look at like, for example, your zaps, you're familiar with Zapier, to your point, you opened up the disclosure menu. There's a handful of things you can do over there.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is you can edit the existing zap, if you will. So let's say that you had a zap, for instance, and you want to go ahead and edit the configuration. You can do the exact same thing with a transfer. That would
Right.
be one option. Before we go there, though, just throw
Yeah.
this out. Or for instance, let's say you went through and updated, or you created a new sheet, right? There's instances where basically I've seen people having data dumps just basically replace the existing sheet. So kind of two options there. If you didn't have to change any configuration, such as like changing the target of the transfer, it's a little tough to see, but I believe there should be a run again on the disclosure, or run transfer.
Yeah. And this will assume that I want the same, original source to the same destination.
Right.
But on the end
Right.
screen, I could say like, oh, actually don't transfer these 10 ones because we did it last week.
Yep.
Okay. It won't just run it. Okay,
No,
great.
actually,
Add
you can go
filters.
back and
Yeah, perfect.
it'll basically they'll bring you back to where you're at exactly. And so this is
Yeah.
going to
Okay.
reload back out everything based on the configuration you had.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Perfect. So that's the way I would rerun it. Let's say that they just update this sheet. I would just say like, okay, great, easy. Like, let me just run that again for these 50 records, and then we're done. And that's actually like a really thoughtful way of using an existing kind of, I guess, idea of Zap, which is somewhat unrelated to transfer potentially if I had, if you had built it differently, but because I'm a Zapier user, this actually feels very intuitive to me. But
Right.
then how do I edit the sheet but keep the structure?
Edit the sheet but keep the structure. So edit the actual transfer to target the new sheet effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
So in that disclosure menu, you should be able to click edit on the right hand side.
Okay, so this is
Cool.
essentially
Okay, so
taking me through the steps, but with kind of the existing information filled out.
predefined. You got it,
Okay.
exactly. So if you're only changing one thing here, it might be a lot of clicking next, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boom. Okay, great. So it gets the metadata and it says like, okay, if it finds that same existing information, let me just make sure I've got this.
Yep, it tries to map it over.
Yeah, perfect. Boom. Cool. So we're going to be done with our example. I did want to do MailChimp after, but I don't think we'll have time. We only got about 10 minutes left. So folks, if you have a question for Taylor, I do see one question for Colleen. We're going to have a bunch of time for Q&A. So, go ham in the chat if you do have questions about present or future transfer. But let me just go ahead and finish that Zap with that said. Looks good. Or I'd love to know in the chat, like, what are you hoping to use it for? Right? I'd love some examples if folks have like ideas already. And I would assume that my audience is like 75% paying Zapier users, so they have like access to it right away. So my expectation is that they're all going to go ahead and use it right away. Cool. So we're bringing in those two. And then I want to select all. Bring that. It's going to cost me 5. Boom. And if we go over to that, these are the 5 that we created. And now I'm really interested. So we see that it matched to the existing account. And then, yeah, we have some examples where there are 2 contacts. So it is that kind of ability to, if you have your database structure and you're coming from a sheet and you have linked records, and I imagine that for folks who use Webflow, this will also be the case, right? So if you have, in Webflow, this is like, Taylor, way too niche for you, but a lot of folks work with Webflow bulk transfers. You're probably gonna have to do an array of CMS IDs separated by commas, but it should understand that as a multi-reference field. So the YouTube world will create a how to bulk transfer multi-reference fields into Webflow soon enough. If not, if no one can find it, I'll find someone to create that video. So that was Zapier transfers. So I'm gonna do one more. I think it's another time for a little more confetti. I have to say I'm particularly impressed with the elegance of this as like a starting point for transfers, and I love how you've reused a lot of the elements that folks are familiar with. So yeah, I'm really bullish on this. I think it's really exciting. Questions from the chat.
And I'm glad to hear that too. I was going to just quickly say too, like you kind of point out a few times about, there's a thin line to be kind of, or decide between about how to kind of, leverage existing capabilities, kind of make something that feels familiar to folks, but also introduce a new capability to a system. And so, it's a balancing act, I'm trying to say, I suppose. So anyways, long way of saying, appreciate the praise on that, set of decisions that were made there. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would have been very simple to be like, hey, it's transfers this new world, and like, we're now an ETL company. What's up, But I think for most of your users, or even for me, like, I see Zapier as like this moving of information, right? And this actually fits really nicely into that. And I could see it's like a really good starting point for potentially finding that area that Zapier can really excel in, whether that's simple ETL, right? So adding some filters and maybe adding, a timer on it to say like, hey, once a week, do this thing. Here are the configurations that I want.
Mm-hmm.
But then, some tools out there will be like, okay, yeah, we're full blown ETL, but it's really complicated to use. And so I think you've kind of really nicely thought about who uses this, how can they use it simply and how we can build on top of it. And for more experienced no coders, I'm sure it's like a really cool thing to have in their back pocket as well.
Really hope so. That's awesome here.
Yeah. Okay, so one question from Colleen, which again speaks to the types of folks who watch Automate All the Things, is let me just find it here. Can one use transfer with Zapier storage? So move the data into Zapier storage and then potentially move it to somewhere else to be used in Zapier. So when I said that folks are going to have innovative ways of using Zapier, this I think falls under that category.
It definitely does, because I don't know the answer. I think
Let's give it a try. Let's see.
Tested actually at the destination. You give it a shot. Yeah, 100%. This goes back to some of my earlier comments about the best thing about, or one of the best things about working at Zapier is our users have extremely innovative ways of stretching things that we've built in ways that we didn't think possible before. And I have not tested transfer going to Zapier storage, but I will. Yeah, the notion of like persisting past kind of transfer has come up as well, and so that's some it goes into the areas of the stuff we're looking at too, and we're thinking about here. So
let me move the chat. I have a good I pressed on the wrong thing. Sorry about that.
More confetti.
Yeah, more confetti. But confetti's right? So you can use storage by Zapier, right? So you could imagine a transfer that says, go from Airtable or from Sheets into storage, right? So set value.
Yep.
It would be a quite. I don't see why you would do it, but I'm sure someone will prove me wrong and find a really good use case. So I don't know, Colleen, if you had one in mind, but you can. I don't know if you, Taylor, could find a good reason why you would use storage by Zapier as like the sync destination.
Off the top of my head, no, but to, again, kind of repeat myself again, there's plenty of times that I have thought in my head, like, I don't see why someone would do XYZ thing with Zapier, and then they come up with this great use case. I'm like, okay, that actually makes sense. Now that's good to know. And so
cool. Okay. Yeah, those are the questions we got. So Taylor, huge thanks for coming on. Everyone in the chat, huge thanks to Taylor for coming on. What I hope, and Taylor, when you maybe next year get more functionality. Oh, there was a question. So Colleen, manipulate the data. So I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking of using storage for. But yeah, it seems like Colleen's already got a use case. So once you've built it out, send a tweet to Taylor and let us know what you've built. And when Taylor comes back, we'll showcase examples of what folks have built. So yeah, Taylor, really appreciate you coming on. Really appreciate everything you've built. I hope you'll come back next year and show us off the amazing 10, 50 features you've added next year. And folks, reach out to Taylor with examples of how you're using it. I'm sure you'd be curious to see how folks are using it and get feedback. So really appreciate Taylor, you coming on. Any parting words for folks?
Great. I appreciate having me. Give transfer for a spin, take it for a drive, and to your point, Aron, feel free to reach out to me personally with any type of rants, raves, concerns, and/or ideas. We're seriously interested in all the cool and fun ways that our customers and users use transfer. So
amazing. So if it's a rant, don't say you're coming from Automate All the Things. If it's a rave, please please let them know you watched the video and you thought it was really cool. Cool. Well, thanks everyone. I'll be back next week for some co-streaming with Elif Hiz. We're going to do some marketing use cases, and we'll probably use Zapier then as well. So even if you're not here, Taylor, you'll probably be showcased on the stream. So that's it for this week. Thanks everyone for joining. Taylor, huge thanks again, and I'll talk to you all next week. Bye, Taylor. Thanks for coming. Bye, y'all.